Morning, everybody. Still got about 5 minutes till we start our webinar, the executive role in corporate compliance. My name is Greg Chamberlain. So we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. You can get yourself a cup of coffee, make yourself comfortable. If anyone's got a really cool compliance joke, they can put it in the chat box. Keep ourselves entertained while we wait. Okay, I see the attendees going up quite nicely. We should have a nice audience today. Thank you, Nati. Looking forward to it. We're looking forward to chatting to you. Jacques, yeah, the presentation is going to be shared afterwards. Cool, Sean. Glad you're looking forward to it. Hope to meet your expectations. Thank you, Salma. We will try and answer the questions as we go through. If there are logistical questions, you're struggling with your webinar, please put those questions in there as well. And Angela should be able to get back to you and assist you. Morning, Lynette. Just responding not to everyone who joins, but just those who are typing in the question and answer box. So I say hello to someone and not yourself. Sorry about that. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes. I see the numbers are still climbing, so as soon as there starts to be a bit of stability in the number of attendees, I think, and obviously it's 10 o'clock, we'll kick it off. Thank you for your patience. Yvette, the webinar is 1.5 hours. We hope you'll be able to stay. If not, we also having a session recorded, so it will be available if you missed the last session. But we hope that you'll be able to stay for the full 1.5 hours. And Paco, good morning to you too. I see it's 10 o'clock, but the numbers are climbing quite quickly, so I'm just going to wait a little bit longer if you don't mind. Morning, Lynn. Morning, Carmel. Morning, Simpiwe. Nice, friendly people. Say good morning to them. Okay, I think we'll just give it a minute. Seem to have a bit of stability in the numbers now. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this LexisNexis and Chartered Institute of Corporate Compliance webinar entitled The Executive Role in Corporate Compliance. We hope you're going to enjoy it, and we're very grateful to have you with us. My name is Greg Chamberlain, and I'm responsible for some of the compliance products that LexisNexis supplies to our customers. I find that quite ironic because if you speak to the Motor Licensing Bureau, they'll tell you my compliance is actually pretty poor, but maybe I can assist other people. Don't take it from the preacher. Just to let you know, this webinar will be recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording with you. And regarding the housekeeping, all your microphones are off. There is a Q&A button section on the right-hand side of your control panel. Please use this to ask any questions, whether they be about the content or logistical problems you're having, and we'll get back to you. We'll answer the questions at the end, but feel free to ask the question whilst the speaker is speaking, and then we'll get back to you guys later. If you are going to address your question to a specific speaker, please make a note of it in your question so that we know which speaker should be answering that question. Just some other housekeeping. If you need the toilet, I'm not sure where it is for you. For me, it's down the corridor on the left. Regarding your cell phones, your mics are muted. You don't have to turn it off. Regarding a coffee break, I guess you can just take it when and wherever you want. So that's a bit of the housekeeping. My next role is to address our facilitator, who is Melanie Ramallo. She is relatively new to LexisNexis. I still haven't had the privilege of meeting her face to face, but I can tell you that she is very passionate and very excited to get involved in LexisNexis and our business. And we see Melanie there. Welcome, Melanie. Melanie's strategic responsibility is to deliver customer value through intelligent data and analytics and improved customer experience and a modern and digitalized marketing experience. So she is going to be interrogating you guys as customers and prospective customers. Got close to 30 years experience and an innovative leader. Qualifications include a Master's in Business Administration endorsed by Oxford, diploma and certificates for IMM and Marketing Management, WITS Business School Management Advancement Programming, and Industrial and Organizational Psychology qualification. Well, I don't know where she got all the opportunity to do all that, but congratulations, Melanie. And I'm going to hand over to you to take over. Now, everyone will notice I'm the thorn amongst the roses, and the thorn is leaving now, so only the roses will be left.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much for that beautiful welcome. And I want to welcome everybody this morning and get right into it. Thank you for joining us this morning. And it's a beautiful day just to talk about governance around corporate compliance this morning. I want to thank Greg for the beautiful introduction and for the housekeeping rules, which is so much easier because we do it in the comfort of our homes or from our offices. And this morning, I want to introduce you to our esteemed panelists that will be taking part in this conversation with us today around corporate compliance in the midst of disaster around this pandemic in the past 6 months, and how it's drastically changed the way we work and the way we operate, and put a lot more pressure and stress on compliance in the organization. My first panelist I want to introduce you to this morning is Nonhlanhla Ongepacht. She's a legal outreach and compliance lead at MultiChoice. Nonhlanhla has a career spanning over 20 years, working for some of the leading players in the banking and broadcasting in South Africa and the rest of the African continent. During her career, she acquired immense business strategy development, stakeholder management, and innovation skills. Most recently, she has been at the forefront of introducing corporate governance initiatives in the broadcasting industry, which have included the implementation of contracts management forum and a legal compliance conference. Welcome, Nonhlanhla. My next panelist would be Jamie Woodley. Jamie Woodley is a compliance officer at our Alton Group. Jamie Woodley is an admitted attorney and holds a BCom degree, LLB, and Masters in Corporate Law, and has established her career as a governance, risk, and compliance professional with over 15 years' experience in the fields of corporate governance, risk management, compliance and ethics management, and anti-fraud strategies in both private and public sectors. Jamie has previously worked with Sasol and the City of Ekurhuleni, and she has successfully been able to guide, shape, and influence of governance and compliance best practice philosophies and strategies, which supports business enablement. To lead, influence, and develop corporate governance and compliance policies, strategies that constantly deliver and contribute to achieving business objectives and improve governance standards. Jamie considers herself to be a woman of integrity who is confident and committed to continuously strive for excellence, innovation, and improvement in any environment. Welcome, Jamie Woodley. It's wonderful to have you both on this morning. My last panelist is Mkhubile Mlongo. She's a director at Hlanganani Singhobe. Born and raised in Soweto, Johannesburg, Mkhubile attended Maryville College and proceeded to further her studies at the University of Witwatersrand, where she obtained a BA Honours degree in sociology, majoring in industrial relations. Mkhubile joined a broadcasting corporate environment in her honours year, which solicited her passion for the employer relationship and governance framework that exists in corporations. Mkhubile is currently studying towards a postgraduate diploma in practice management at the Henley Business School in her 10-year journey. She still continues to explore the interrelation between society, work, and the employee-employer dynamics. Mkhubile's qualitative research background has given an insight on the different meanings relating to concept of work that employers in the formal and informal sectors hold, and their different relationships to their work environments and those who lead them within such environments. So welcome to my panelists this morning. It's absolutely amazing to be among such beautiful, intelligent, amazing, experienced women this morning, and I welcome all the attendees who've made this morning possible. So with no further ado, I just want to, after introducing all of you this morning, introduce the topic to our attendees and to our panel this morning, which is the executive role in corporate compliance. By far my favorite topic, because we have to live it, breathe it, and work it every day. And coming from the financial sector, it's something that's been embedded in me. So this morning we want to share the role of leadership in both the public and private sector and have a discussion on this as the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic and the South African government's reaction thereto under the Disaster Management Act 57 of 2002 as amended. And the discussion will, just so that everybody knows, I will include and ask questions from our panelists, and they will respond with their experience and what they've been doing and what their input is to this topic this morning. So with no further ado, we're going to go into, and as I said, the role of leadership both in public and private. From a pandemic perspective has been quite strenuous on all of us. And I would like to bring Nhlanhla into this conversation and immediately start off by saying, what has your beliefs been as a key corporate governance consideration in changing environment fueled by a pandemic? What is what would you apply today, and how has it been within your own organization that you've made reference to this new way of working and how the pandemic has influenced us and created new stresses on us and brought in such new dynamics into what we have to do and how we have to comply and how we have to work and the new ways of working from a compliance perspective? Nhlanhla, please share with me in your environment how you have gone about doing this from a disaster management and compliance perspective.
Thank you, Mel. This pandemic has actually, destabilized businesses and has brought new challenges. And so the key challenge introduced by the pandemic is the limitation of the physical contact, social distancing. So as a result, COVID-19 pandemic has imposed remote working arrangement for employees on businesses, which they might not have considered before COVID-19. I mean, before, employees had to negotiate, to work from home. So now this is enforced on them. And so whereas, employers now have to ensure that they encourage employees to work from home. And this is as a result from the National Health Authority. And this is for the good of the employee and of the nation in general. So remote working has impacted corporate governance in many ways. And a few examples of these include virtual meetings. Companies have largely done away with face-to-face meetings in favor of virtual meetings for decision-making. Teams have gradually adopted communicating and workflow management tools that allows people to work from anywhere. Tools such as Zooms and Hangouts, just to mention a few. And companies have to rely more on technology to conduct business. This means, they have to now relook and review the budget allocation. But this begs, several questions. Are the boards and executives and staff technologically equipped to have virtual meetings? Do they need a guidance and support to ensure virtual meetings run as smoothly and as efficiently as possible? But again, do companies' constitutional documents require amendments to facilitate these new ways of decision making? Because you would remember most constitutional documents envisage a face-to-face decision making. Is the business technologically equipped to handle your electronic transactions? The law might be agreeable, to this, but does the company policy allow for your digital signature? Are the networks used for communication secured? Because that's another challenge that this pandemic has brought about in the organization. The fact that people are working from home, it means it has opened doors for personal devices and applications being used to distribute corporate assets, and information comes with an increased security risk. Companies need to ensure that they've updated and enforced the data security and their corporate policies to address the use of personal devices for business purposes. But how do companies sustain employee engagement and continue to reap the benefits of teamwork, while people are working remotely? And I've seen that employee duties and obligation in remote working arrangements. If you look at the health and safety of employees, it's one of the many responsibilities an employer has to contend with. In other workplaces, employers are required to protect the well-being of employees. Generally, the workplace would include any premises, place, facilities, vessels, or other location where work is carried out or which the worker has access in the course of his employment. So therefore, the duty of care must always be exercised, irrespective of whether the employee is working remotely or not. I mean, this and so what this means is, if you look at the employer's guide in working from home in response to this outbreak of COVID-19, which was published by the International Labour Organization, it has advised that employers needs to check this, that the worker can perform and carry out the duties from home. Is it safe to do so in the comfort of their home? Are the adjustment made for them to carry out the task, if needed, to ensure that they're safe, and this is doable from home? So this is a new challenge for employees and corporates. And so employees have the right. Do they have the right equipment and tools to safely do this in their own homes? Because remember, this includes productivity and ensuring that the equipments are safe and where applicable. So companies have to rely more on technology to conduct these businesses. This means that they need to review budget allocations. Connectivity is another challenge, especially in Africa. And how do companies now bridge this gap? So you're dealing, on the one hand, the companies are dealing with the pandemic. On the other hand, they have to be content with the issue of connectivity. So arrangements are made to ensure that companies' equipment, if taken home to facilitate working environment, is accounted for and returned in the condition that it was provided. Employees have relevant information, instructions, and supervision and training, including measures to deal with emergencies. Reasonable accommodation are made for employees with disability in relation to the workplace that they're required to perform from home. The arrangements that are made for employees physically and mental welfare, this has been quite stressful for your employer and employee. I mean, this pandemic has taken a toll, on both the company and the employees. There has been several articles that I've noted in the past months, especially in the initial stages of the pandemic, which then have said employees' productivity has increased. But the flip side of it is that employees were working longer hours. The health and safety responsibilities of employers in a remote working context, however, depends very much on the work assigned to the employee and the equipment provided by the employer. So the employer should still provide sufficient information and must encourage employees to take the necessary steps in order to ensure that the well-being is safeguarded at all times while performing their duties remotely. Additionally, though, it is highly advised that employers have the remote working policy, which covers occupational health and safety measures to prevent occupational injuries. So furthermore, such policies should assume that no liability for injuries arising from employees' home and workplace outside the agreed hours or any loss, destruction, or injury may occur to the home of the employee. I mean, it then means that the role of an employer has only moved from, the building to the employee home. I mean, this includes family members, visitors that may become injured within or around, employee home. An interesting case that I came across, which was, the decision was made on the 23rd of April in 2019. And you might be wondering why I'm talking about a case that happened in 2019 and the pandemic that we're facing in 2020. If you may indulge me, please, it will just make sense. So the Switzerland Federal Supreme Court ruled that if an employee is required to work from home, the company must pay a share of the rent. In the case of in this case, though, the part-time employee didn't have a bigger rent or an apartment to incur, working remotely. So, but was entitled to a monthly reimbursement of 150 francs, in dollars, $157, pounds, 127 pounds, because the company was able to save on office rent, although the decision mostly flew under the radar at the time. But it has found its relevance in the light of COVID-19. With such, if you look at Switzerland's labor force working from home during the pandemic, the ruling has sparked considerable debate. Does it mean that every employee who's working from the kitchen table due to COVID-19 should expect to receive a subsidiary? A deciding factor is likely to be whether an employee has to work remotely or chooses to do so. I mean, if you could work from the office and you choose to work from home, I don't think a company needs to reimburse you for that. But rent compensation could come with a downside, though. It might not always be financially beneficial for an employee It could mean that other standards of allowance, such as those employees that receive food or commuting in a far away, but permanently working from home, even with a partial rental payment, could also mean less money if salary is pegged on living. As if you're living in an expensive city and your rent is lower. I mean, look at this is echoed by the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, as suggested in the US. So, then if you look at your BCP, others call it business continuity planning. Business continuity management is integral in good corporate governance. The emergence of corporate, COVID-19 has served as a reminder on the importance of having adequate management processes, capability to identify your potential threats, advanced planning and safeguarding of critical business functions in the event of disruption. Although many businesses have business continuity and contingency plans in place, COVID-19 has put that to the test. Adequate planning should address matters such as employee availability, functionality of IT systems, cybersecurity, communication protocol, legal and regulatory compliance. Such planning should also evaluate potential, disruptions to our operations and business relationships. The evaluation may include ensuring that management is appropriately considering that, while the impact of, COVID-19, it has an impact on employees, but such disruption should not then impact on your customers, suppliers, and financial resources. And the service providers, to review, look at your contracts. Now there has been an increase, in reviewing your force majeure triggers in contract, because a lot of your suppliers, a lot of, I guess service providers have had to default because of this new pandemic. And what are the termination rights and with the relations to the contract? But then does the company have the adequate insurance coverage and whether proper steps are taken for this potential claim? So lastly, due to the unique nature of COVID-19, the board, as part of the ongoing monitoring and oversight responsibility, should continue discussing any implementation issues with management and evaluation of whether any moderation for the disaster or modification plans are necessary to deal with new issues. Because with COVID-19, new issues keep arising. Thank you, Mel. Over to you.
Plantler. Oh, wow, what great insights this morning, just to hear about what a company's current culture and values and what we should be doing in the ever-changing market and the pandemic that's upon all of us worldwide. And so many valuable nuggets around how we should start looking at our policies internally so that they can now, from a home environment, be safe for the employees and safe for the organization, and also we remain compliant from a health and safety perspective. I really like also the insights about the board and the roles and responsibilities that the board has as the oversight body of the entire organization, and having monitoring and evaluation in play so that nothing surprises them. Also took a golden nugget around the BCP and how integral that is from an emergence perspective. And then just the proper step approach to ensure that you know how to claim. But there's so many interesting golden and wonderful nuggets that you shared with us, that now it's working from home, it's no longer from a building, and how we need to look at things from a different viewpoint, from a compliance aspect. So thank you. That really has been a lot to take in. I was taking copious notes, even about your case that you shared in 2019. Can you believe it, that something was brought to the courts then, not knowing where we would be a year later, literally, for South Africa? And to what I also enjoyed about the case is that we would have to, and I think there would be some hybrid situations, as you said, if you work from home and it's your choice, it's a different aspect. But if the company insists that you work from home, there is the element of how do you compensate, how do you look after them working from a different environment. So thank you very much, Nhlanhla, for those amazing insights this morning. And as we move and we put these priorities and responsibilities in place and we look at them and as they're key, as you've shared with us, we also look at, you know, what would you share and what is your beliefs from a executive priority perspective in this challenging environment, which was, you know, would you like to share with us a little bit more around the succession plans of management, you know, how we would multi-skill and cross-skill, looking at the different roles that we have to play, as you touched on earlier. And, you know, the technology support was also interesting that you said now I have to look at the equipment from home, make sure that they are insured and protected because of the fact that it's no longer in the office. It's a very different viability from that perspective. So thank you very, very much for all of those nuggets, you know, really speaking about health and safety, just to recap, succession plans from a management perspective, multi-skilling and cross-skilling across productivity measures, because that's been a big one for everyone, and then the technological support that you need, and the challenges we have around connectivity from a Wi-Fi perspective, airtime, data. It's not easy in the African continent. It's also very expensive. Okay, thank you so much for those insights. And as we move on, I would like to, my next question is going to go to Jamie, who, as we've been listening to Nhlanhla, sharing with us those aspects and highlighting to us, I'd like to know from you, Jamie, now, the key considerations and responsibilities. Would it be possible for you to talk about that accountability from an executive perspective in an ever-changing environment that is fueled by a pandemic, knowing that we already had so many changes, and now to add to this is the pandemic that's fueling everything we have to do. So Jamie, welcome, and welcome to our conversation this morning. Would you respond and touch on those key pointers for our listeners this morning?
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks to everyone for giving me this opportunity just to share my thoughts with you today. Yeah, I think the pandemic has truly and undoubtedly caused chaos and confusion, anxiety and stress in our society, in our world, and has really placed extraordinary demands on our leaders, leaders of business and government across the world. I think it's really changed the way we live, the way we think, the way we operate, and has really changed our context drastically in the last year. But, you know, with this pandemic constantly evolving, leaders have faced unpredictability, information that's just constantly changing, been in a crisis mode with multiple unknowns, and there's been a need to respond very quickly and to adapt very quickly in this context. Leaders have had to consider, you know, multidimensional aspects for society, the environmental and economic, the psychological impacts that it's had on employees and other stakeholders, the communities around us. And they've really been propelled to think and brainstorm and make quick decisions amidst this uncertainty. And I think it was really in order to adapt and survive. You know, ultimately, you know, leaders have had to remain accountable and to justify every decision and every action that has been taken ever since you know, we've been faced with this pandemic and the lockdown, etc. But accountability meant that, you know, leaders had to be decisive and also, you know, amongst the boundaries of integrity and the values that we live by. There was a demand for maximum transparency in the decision-making processes, being open to challenges, getting feedback, And I call it, being optimistic amidst this pandemic. They had to be realistic as well. So being practical and realistic, but also being optimistic in the decisions that were made. But yet accountability, is unquestionable. It produces trust, and trust produces support for action. And I think that's what leaders really strive for, to have the buy-in and alignment and support of the organization as a whole, and not just making decisions from the top, but having an inclusive approach, and ensuring that all the leaders and management across the organization provide input and feedback. Our leaders have had to make some really tough decisions, regarding leave policies and remote working policies, looking at, the bottom line and cash flow, and looking at increases and bonuses and how those can be adapted as well. So it's really been tough for leaders to make these decisions, and every decision had to be justified and substantiated across the board. But what's been nice is that there's been, for us, we've had inclusive and consultative approach from leaders, and that has really shown a remarkable response, and being appreciated by employees, especially who have stood by the leadership of the organization. But accountability also means, ethical leadership in line with the value of integrity. Leaders have had to strive to do all this within the boundaries of an ever-changing regulatory landscape, and to do what's right, putting the employees first, having empathy to know, exactly what the organization, the employees are going through. They've had to make all of these considerations in light of the decision making, and to ensure that every decision has been made with integrity, within the boundaries of the laws and regulations. And as we know, there's been a myriad of regulations coming through from the Disaster Management Act, and there's been constant change. So even the decisions had to have been adjusted and changed as we've went along. But adaptation is key. I think the willingness to move, the willingness to accept the status quo, but also to move from mundane practices to what we are used to a new normal amidst the crisis, so that we continuously learning and adjusting the responses as necessary. Another key element within the bounds of accountability is the delegation of authority, which I think is critical. Senior executives needed to prepare to shift some responsibilities from their command into, a network of teams, different leadership teams, management, etc. And they've had to empower people across the organization to implement, as well as to make key decisions, so that there are greater efficiencies across the organization. It really cannot just be done at the top as a dictatorship, but as a team, a network of teams working together towards one goal, to optimize and to perform even through this crisis. And yes, I think the model of assessing, acting, and evolving comes into play. And I think every organization had to be faced with some sort of crisis management planning, to assess, to organize, to plan and respond has been key. Companies have had to look to the past, to the current, to the future scenarios, engaging their networks and executing those plans. Some of those plans for us included, building a crisis management team and a committee at a group level, as well as at an operational level across our business units. We've also had to adjust policies trigger business continuity plans, and actually rethink them, because I don't think anyone has even considered this type of scenario occurring. And you know, these are some of the areas in which tough decisions had to be made. But I think across the board, as the decisions were made, we've kept employees informed through the tough decision making, through webinars, through interactive consultations and sessions, you know, obtaining advice and thoughts and comments, you know, as well from employees right along through this process. Communication is a key to maintaining transparency. I think, you know, there's a saying that says transparency is job one for leaders through a crisis, and to be clear on what we know, what we don't know, and what we are doing to learn more. And I think there's really been an appreciation for that kind of approach across the board. So yeah, thoughtful communication, putting people first, having integrity in our decision making, having a good, strong network of teams that can execute, and key is also at the end of it evolving, recalibrating, understanding how is this crisis or this pandemic going to change the way we do things for the better, especially as we move into this, you know, digital world or cyber connected world that we are in at the moment. To pivot ourselves for the future is something that needs to be considered now more than ever. And you know, these tough times, they've really tested the resolve and characters of leadership and executive teams. But I think everyone has risen to the challenge, reinforcing accountability in a positive way, engaging our teams, and being decisive in our actions. I think that will really just allow us to become, to stand and to survive and to become stronger than ever before. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Jamie. That is quite the insight around this demonstrating responsible leadership and the fundamentals around what we're looking at. But with all of that in mind, and just listening to what you were saying, how do we recalibrate, using your own words, around moving into the improvements and accountability for organizations, credibility, measurement? Give me 3 aspects in which technology has evolved, just looking at technology and ensuring that corporate governance is maintained. Could you share 3 aspects with us this morning?
Sure. Yeah, I think technology has been at the center. You know, if in these uncertain times we found one thing for certain, and that is that we need to rethink the way we do things using technology, which has allowed us to perform and to network, to engage, to connect right through this lockdown and this time of isolation. Yet, I think, you know, we've really been productive, even through this crisis. We've been able to accomplish a lot more with technology at the center of this pandemic. We find that resilience and connectivity are the new watchwords, you know, for organizations. We've had to adapt quickly, remote working, you know, e-commerce, online services, and all of it has come to the fore. And we're seeing streamlining of decision-making processes. That's, I think, key to the use of technology to allow us to make decisions quickly, having accurate information to adjust and adapt to a changing landscape. So the use of governance, risk, and compliance technology systems has proven to be extremely efficient. And I think we need these systems to allow compliance departments to automate and analyze large volumes of data This is something we've been able to do using the GRC tool from LexisNexis. And even though we've been, at home since March, we've been able to perform compliance risk assessments. We've been able to do compliance audits, build risk management plans across the organization. And we've been able to provide adequate assurance, from a second line function to all our governance committees and the boards whilst being at home. And it's really been the technology behind it that's propelled us and enabled us to have the data available, to provide that data at the click of a button, to get the data of the levels of compliance that we are at, the key pieces of legislation that we need to look at. And one also has to consider that the regulatory landscape is changing dramatically with this crisis. And we've seen a number of regulations come forth, and they've been changing as well. So regulations come forth and there's amendments, etc. And really, there's no way to have a handle of all of it without having a system to actually alert you as to what's happening, on all the industries that we align ourselves to. Monitoring and reporting as well from a central governance perspective becomes much easier when we have a system that assists us to pull reports in real time, to analyze the risks and the levels of compliance so that we can track and monitor in this increasingly changing regulatory landscape that we find ourselves in. I think technology is also key to manage risks, and we've seen quite a number of risks, even with the use of technology. Cybersecurity risk, is one of, or cybercrime has come to the fore as well. And companies need to think about employees working from home, how to secure equipment and software and computers, putting in firewalls, etc. And, providing sufficient training and awareness and budget allocations as well to secure our data. Especially now, data governance, privacy laws with POPI coming into effect. We've all had to reorganize and understand how are we storing, processing, disseminating information in a secure manner. And technology certainly does help us to do this in a more efficient and effective manner. Over to you, Melody.
Thank you, Jamie. That has been quite insightful. And just all around what technology can and how technology can ease the burden of reporting and making sure that we've got what we need from a compliance and governance perspective to give to our boards, our managers, our leadership, and also our day-to-day activities. And it's good to know, just being the marketing and sales director of LexisNexis, that we've been able to help you. Thank you for that, Jamie. And as we just consider what Jamie has shared with us this morning, to all the attendees, talking about executive leadership and their responsibilities, accountability in technology that Jamie touched on, as well as Nonhlanhla that spoke about the culture, the values, the ways of working changing, the security that you have, the insurance you have to overlook. This morning, just getting clarity on the roles of management and executives as well, Jamie and Nonhlanhla touched on how we need to recalibrate, how we need to change, how we need to look at the values and the policies of the organization, which speaks to us as leaders. However, it can only be successful in corporate governance if they are surrounded, and if all of us are surrounded by employees with the same alertness, knowledge, and diligence. So we're going to look more to our next speaker and our next panelist, who is going to share with us her insights around employee relations skills, because we do need the employees with us. We need them on board. We need to take them with us. And Nkubela comes with great experience around the context of corporate governance. And I'd like for you to share with us the experiences with employees and corporate governance, and how an organization can make this more visible. Thank you, and welcome, Nkubela.
Well, thank you very much. So I'll be sharing points around employee engagement in our corporate governance framework. So from an employee engagement perspective, all that we're always trying to hear from an employee is their employee voice. Because remember, an employee also has a contract with the company. So it's so important to try and understand how is our workforce actually feeling at that point. So when we have employee engagements, we gain insight in terms of how do our employees feel? What are their current levels of job satisfaction? What are their perceptions of leadership, especially executive leadership? And how do they regard our organizational culture? And the traditional method that we take in order to gauge our employees, it normally happens with engagement surveys, where we get direct feedback from our staff members and from our employees. Now, the downside of our engagement feedback sessions is that we normally do this on an annual basis, or we do this on a half-quarterly basis. So you've got a board and you've got an executive team that goes into these kind of engagements, either once a year, twice a year, or on every other given quarter. And it puts us in a position where we've got so many gaps, because we get this feedback from our employees, but we cannot link it to their day-to-day employment activities and what they get up to in our workplaces. So I would just like to put forward these considerations for the future, especially for the times that we are in at this point, where we've now got remote working and we don't even know how long this will actually continue for. So I want to speak about how can we ensure that we understand the levels of engagement in our organizations as executives. So the first step for me would be, we need to re-examine how frequently do we ask questions and what type of questions are we asking. So how frequently are we having our engagement sessions with our employees, and the type of questions that we are asking them, especially in these times when the anxiety levels, the fatigue levels, and all other stresses are present in our organization. So this is simple. You can actually have a theme-based questionnaire that poses one or two questions, maybe around mental resistance, in order for you to gauge and to understand what is the extent of anxiety in our organization and what is the extent of our fatigue. Because these are the people who are working from home, but you'll get to have an understanding of how are they feeling at this point. And as executives, especially in the times that we are in, it is so crucial that you can't get this insight once a year. But it's very important for us to have these frequent conversations and engagements with our employees, with our staff members, and our staff composition, because it ensures that from an executive point of view, you are able to be agile. So what agility are we looking for? We're currently looking for agility in terms of our wellness practices, to say, with our employees feeling in the ways that they are feeling. And I've given examples around fatigue, I've given examples around anxiety and anything else that they are feeling. So what wellness measures can we put in place? What other practices can we put in place? And more than anything, what leave practices can we go back into our organizations as executives to go and to adapt, especially in the times that we are living in? Because predominantly our home spaces and our home environment have been great places where we can get a chance to rest. But the home environment has changed completely. We are not only working from home, we actually have homeschooling, or we have a house that is filled with so many people that you can't just take the time out and to take your leave breaks, where you can take the time out to recoup and to become the right kind of employee that we need in our environment in order for you to be engaged. So what we need from our executive is the agility to have these kind of surveys and to look at what can we adapt and how quickly can we begin the adaptations that we need in our organization. But another tool that I've picked up that a lot of executives seem to overlook is the compliance data that they've got at their disposal, and compliance data from so many areas of their business. Because once you look at your compliance data, then you also have an understanding and you get to see how engaged are your employees. Because when you look at your compliance data, you get to understand what kind of decisions our employees taking on a day-to-day basis. And that is so important when we are working from home to see What is their decision-making framework? How are they making decisions? What are their current behavioral patterns? And what kind of actions are they engaged in as our employees? So the data that I'm speaking about can start off with your customer experience and satisfaction reports, because that's where you get to see how are your employees at this point when you are not supervising and you're not monitoring them in the physical sense. How are they engaging with your customers? What are they saying with your customers? Are they consistent in their behavior when it comes to your customers? Secondly, what are the productivity reports saying? It's so important for us to still try and understand how productive our employees, even though we are currently working from home. Because I go back to say there is no line management supervision. There is no line management monitoring. So it's all on them. So our productivity reports give us an insight into how well engaged are our employees. But I also like drawing into human resources reports or legal or wherever they may sit in your organization, because that also helps you to understand what are the behavioral patterns, especially at this point, that you may be witnessing from your employees. And we cannot leave out your regulatory and your compliance reports, because those create a framework in which employees need to make decisions, need to act. So we also need to draw into those to have an understanding in terms of what is happening with our employees. And the last point that I just want to put forward is, with the current framework and the environment that we are working in and into our future ways of work, it's so important for executives to also try and solve the frustrations that employees are facing. So my favorite example at this point would be the impact of power cuts. Impact of power cuts, they don't only frustrate you as a business and as a line manager, but they also frustrate employees, because you take away their productivity time. You take away someone who has planned their day. They want to ensure that they give to the business and they're as engaged as possible, and then they experience a power cut. And what is the frustration on the line management side? You don't get the level of productivity that you want. And if we start making these future considerations, because on the one hand, the pandemic has shown us that our world can be turned upside down, but we're also still dealing with the day-to-day frustrations that we've always had in our country, and power cuts is unfortunately one of those. So this should speak to what tools of trade do we need to have for our future ways of work to mitigate all of these factors that we are faced with. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that insight and for those pointers. I certainly have jotted them down as an executive of our organization. Nkobele, before we close our panel discussion for some questions from the floor, I'd like you to share with us the pitfalls from an executive perspective in relation to employees and corporate governance in closure of our panel discussion. Would you share some pointers with us?
Okay, thank you, Melanie. And this happens to be one of my favorite topics. So when we look at the pitfalls that we get to experience sometimes from an executive point of view, I will just draw quickly into two examples. I'll draw into the McDonald's example, which I'm sure you've seen in the news, and I'll also draw into the Tonga Tulip example, which has also made the news. So from a McDonald's perspective, we had a former company CEO and president who contravened a company policy, where the policy was basically saying there can be no relationships between managers and direct or indirect reports. So by November 2019, the former CEO was dismissed for his relations with either his direct or indirect reports. But by August 2020, it became so apparent to McDonald's that he actually concealed the nature and the extent of the relationships that he had with his fellow staff members, and he went as far as destroying very crucial evidence in order to conceal what he had done. So the company at this stage made a decision to take legal action against the former CEO to recoup the money that was paid to him in a settlement agreement. And from a Tonga perspective, we have a situation where with the whistleblower who came forward, they highlighted financial and governance oversights by the CEO and other financial executives. The actions from the company was to subject the respective individuals to disciplinary inquiries, but unfortunately for the company, they were given an administrative fine by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. And the fine initially was set at 118 million rands, but because they considered the shareholders and the impact that they were already feeling, which was a plummeting share price, the amount of money was then reduced to 20 million. So when we look at the executive pitfalls, the golden thread that I've picked up in these two examples, so intentionally I went with the global example and I went with the local example in our South African framework. The golden thread that we get to see is that there's a lack of integrity from an executive point of view. So there's a lack of integrity and ethical behavior in terms of how they dealt with the company. And when you draw into the King report that speaks about corporate governance, it describes integrity as possessing the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. And when you look at the definition of ethics, it regards ethics as ethical values applied to conduct. So in essence, there was simply a failure of being honest in terms of their dealings with the company. And usually, what are the consequences of executive pitfalls? One, you end up having employment, civil, and criminal law violations. So from a company point of view, you have very senior executives who are subjected to disciplinary inquiry processes. But even in the courts, we now have to go through civil matters and criminal matters in order to recoup what the company has lost from the actions of these executives. Secondly, corporates find themselves in a space of being unable to conceal their internal dealings to the public. So it now becomes public knowledge that your senior executives have failed to also adhere to their own internal policies that govern ethics, that govern conduct, which they expect their employees to actually apply themselves. And I also just want to give you this one last closing point, especially in the times that we are in, having drawn into these executive pitfalls. So the majority of our companies at this stage, we've put in place a lot of corporate governance controls to govern and to mitigate a number of risks, from favoritism, nepotism, how people conduct themselves, and to ensure that we comply with our regulatory frameworks from a financial and a regulatory perspective. So in the context of COVID-19, where a number of us are working remotely and are working from home, and the only thing that's required is an internet connectivity, you must picture a situation where you've got a group of employees who could be engaged in a whole range of relationships. And I also mean romantic relationships that are not disclosed to you as a company in line with your corporate governance controls. So these people are able to engage, they're able to meet online, we're able to visit each other in our homes, we're able to travel away together. And a whole lot of things could go wrong in us engaging in these type of relationships where we have not disclosed them to our employers, especially in remote working. Who is there to firstly witness that I'm in a relationship with someone and I haven't disclosed? And who is there to utilize your whistleblowing lines to bring this kind of conduct to the company's attention? So this is what we need to consider in the virtual ways of work, to say, how applicable are our policies when your employees are out of sight? So how applicable are your monitoring measures when your employees are away from you? How do we go back and how do we monitor? Thank you very much, Melanie.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. Certainly gives us thought to think about around the pitfalls and ensuring that we've got something highlighted and it brings it to mind to keep them on our radar, because as you say, so it can easily run away from us because of the remote working, especially when we're at the office. There's so many things that remind us of what we should and should not be doing. So I really enjoyed those reminders and just bringing them into the front of everybody's thought processes today. And thank you for sharing that, Nkobeni. It really has been very educational and has empowered me as an executive.
Thank you so much.
So before I give the floor over to the questions, I would like to just say thank you to my three beautiful panelists who has certainly given us so much thought-provoking pointers and directions on what to follow and where to go to. And I just want to say thank you to Nhlanhla, thank you to Jamie, and thank you to Nkobeni for sharing right from a leadership perspective, a holistic understanding of compliance and governance within the workplace in this disaster of disaster management of the pandemic, and how we all had to quickly, I like what Nkobeni was using, the agile, being agile in our thinking, and all of you have used that. And for me, it always goes to, as executives, we mustn't be afraid to fail fast, but learn fast too, so that we can do the right thing and get it in quickly and get it moving. And that's exactly what we were all taught in the past 6 months. And so now, in thanking my panelists, I want to open up the floor to some questions, and we will get our panelists to answer them for you. So please feel free. And I know that Greg has been looking at some questions that already has come in earlier. Greg, is there any question you would want us to respond to that you received earlier in the session? and I want to open up the session to all the attendees to pose their question. You can write it out and we will see it come through.
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. From Renita, just a simple one. What Labour Act states that the company needs to give you a rand compensation working, and how, or giving an allowance? I'm not sure if we have, that's obviously a bit of a detailed reference question, but if we do have the answer.
Jamie, is that something you would be able to have a insight on? Could you say the question again, Greg?
Pardon.
Okay. Yes, yes. Nonhlanhla, any idea?
Okay, I think maybe we skip over that one. It's obviously referring to a specific regulation, and we can get one of.
Nonhlanhla is talking. I just couldn't hear her, Greg. Nonhlanhla, have you got yourself on? Can you just check? There's a mute.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Look, I think as we said, and I think Jamie alluded to this earlier. Remember, COVID-19, comes with these change in regulations. So I think for now is we look at company policy. That's the company policy, not really so much as is the regulation specifically, referred to. But you look at what is your company policy. Will it then allow this for employees to actually? I know that a lot of companies, especially in the last few months, have been looking at how do they subsidize employees. This is an ongoing conversation, and obviously it differs from company to company. But there isn't any legislation for now that I can refer to. But I know that there's been talks from executives to then say, how do we then ensure that we compensate employees? They look at electricity, they look at, data, they look at, I think, rent. That is why I referred to a case. I have no South African case that said precedent that I can refer to. That is why we're looking at the case in Switzerland. Over to you, Mel.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight, Nonhlanhla. Greg, do you have another question for us that was received earlier?
Sure. I have another one which probably also goes to company policies. The leave accumulation, how do you think this will be affected by the arrangement of working from home? And that's from Mike.
Sorry, Chris, I didn't fully hear the question.
The leave accumulation. Obviously, working from home, it's quite difficult to track who's on leave and who's not in some spaces. But how will the leave accumulation process be effective by the arrangement of working from home?
So it depends on the organization. So remember, as things stand, we're still relying on the statute, which is the Basic Condition of Employment Act, because it regulates the number of leave days that can be given to an employee. But obviously, companies put in place policies that can go over and above in terms of what are the leave requirements, how many leave days are they giving to employees. So at this stage, seeing that we are all working from home, it has to be a business decision. It has to be a business decision to say, it's either we'll create another policy or an amendment to our policy, which says employees are still required to go on leave. Because we can't remove leave and leave provisions in this pandemic. It doesn't mean that just because we're working from home, the work has now come to an end. And at some point, you do need to have employees who do take a break. Because if you don't take a break, you'll have all kinds of break. You'll have a meltdown. There's so many things that can happen to an employee who just doesn't take the time out to take a break from everything else that they're doing and their work pressures, and they're solely focused on work. So it depends on what your company actually is doing. But the leave provisions are still governed by the Basic Condition of Employment Act, and the days are 15 mandatory days, which must still be taken by an employee. Maybe the companies then can start having engagement to say, once you've gone over the 15-day mark, what do we do with your leaves? Do you want to get into a process where you can sell some of your leave days? How do we manage your leave days? So in essence, really the pandemic doesn't take anything away from how things should be operating. It's a case of how do we manage now the additional days over and above what the Basic Condition of Employment Act has regulated.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nkobile. I do have a recent question, Greg. I'll take this one. Should the board, question has come through from Ingrid, should the board of directors be made aware of these possible compliance risks? And I would hand it over to either Jamie or Plantla.
It's fine, I'll take this one. Yes, I think it's the responsibility of the executive to ensure that there's a risk management framework, compliance policies and manuals, etc., that outline exactly what your thresholds are, your risk appetite thresholds, your tolerance levels, and then what would actually go to which committee, because I guess not all will go to the board. It's probably the high or the most significant risks that impact the organization at a residual level. And once it has been assessed, that would then be reported by management and by compliance or the risk function through the executive into the risk committee and the audit committee, as well as the board. To obtain assurance. Ultimately, accountability lies with the board, but the assurance will come through the reporting from the executive responsible and accountable for risk and compliance in the organization.
Thank you, Jamie. One more question from Nati. Thank you for the question. The lockdown regulations require employers to schedule the days or time when employees are required to go to the office or when they work from home. Those schedules will then be used to calculate the number of workdays allocated to employees. And that is the ask from Nati is, so it is a request, but I suppose what they're asking is, would the schedules then be used to calculate the numbers of days work? Nkobile?
I'm not sure if I quite understand the question, because ultimately, with us moving into level 1, it simply means that the work which is done at home must start happening in the office, and we just simply need to regulate and ensure that we're compliant in terms of the numbers. But I don't think now, so maybe I just need to go through the regulations just to try and understand where the question is coming from. But from where things stand, we're currently working from home, going into lockdown. The only provisions that have to be made is if we are going into the office, how many people can be in that office space, and we also need to remain compliant to the health and safety regulations that were published at the start of the lockdown by the Department of Employment and Labour in conjunction with the Department of Health.
Yeah, I think Nati's question was, would it be used, if it's not very clear in the question, but I think he's saying, or she's saying, that would it be used in calculating the numbers of days work, and not in this case, because as Nkobile is saying, it's about the lockdown regulation in order to go to the office, not the days of working, not the productivity management. So that's not what the regulation is saying. It's mostly from a safety perspective. Thank you, Nkobile. We have another one. Oh, Nati is saying, this means that the employer needs to set up a schedule for when you're required to work from home, which is then a statement of work days worked. This is offered as a statement, he's saying. Okay, agreed. We need to set up a schedule. And that's what the regulation is requiring. Right, Nkobile?
Right, and it would also make sense for them to, so if we're looking at it from a scheduling point of view, it does make sense to know who is where. So you would need to know how many people are actually in the office and working from the office. So I think it's similar to if you go to a restaurant, we need to register you in. We need to know who came in on the day, what apart from the COVID-19 regulations, but from an employment law, it does make sense to know how many people on this particular day went to the office and how many people continued working from home. Because there's so many dynamics that also come up from working from home as opposed to working in the office. And I'll give you an example. If 10 of us are working in the office and we experience load shedding, chances are your company generators will quickly switch on and you just can continue working and it doesn't affect your productivity levels. But if the remaining 10 are working in their own individual homes and they suddenly hit by a power cut, then it does have an impact on their productivity levels. So as an employer, you do even need to have that distinction to say, on this day, so-and-so experienced this problem, and that's the reason why they were only able to be logged on for 4 hours in comparison to 8 hours with their other colleagues. So looking at it from a scheduling point of view, it actually does assist.
Excellent. Thank you. Just a question to, yes, Greg.
I've just got one that's come through to me privately. Sorry.
Okay.
It's regarding the executive role when it comes to corporate governance, and clearly it has increased substantially even without COVID-19. But realistically, how do the execs keep pace of all these changes? How do compliance teams, what do compliance teams look like, etc.? And someone maybe elaborate on that topic.
I can take it and
Yes.
yeah, sure. I can take it and maybe Jamie, you can add on this. So I think earlier you spoke about having technology to enable, your compliance team to be able to keep abreast of change in legislation. I mean, for the past few months, we've seen, we do use the Lexis tool, and I mean we've seen a change in legislation. I mean, I've been looking at a few countries in Africa where they had to make provision for digital signatures, and although others has still not been approved, but there has been an increase where you need to then know and inform the relevant people in the organization, and from a compliance space, you need to know who's impacted, what is the level of the impact, and who are the executives that need to, either there are submissions that needs to be made, and obviously training has been important as well, because then, people need to understand what is required of them. So as the legislation changes, it then it has an impact on your policy. Is your organization, able to then change, as the legislation changes, can you then relook at your policy? Because, I mean, what worked then and what works now, you need to tweak it. So your conventional ways of working has really and truly, been challenged. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Jamie?
Jamie, I think you're on mute.
That's it?
Sorry. Yeah, I said the board must continuously be informed, and the executive, accountable for compliance and risk within the organization must be able to understand, from the teams or the compliance teams that report into that executive role, will be able to report in real time. As well as to look at non-compliance or areas where there's been a breach, or areas where there has been a partial compliance to a specific piece of legislation, to quickly understand what controls need to be amended or developed or put in place by the various business units or operations within the organization. So those are, executives may make the decisions and roll that out across the organization or through the employees or the business units, management teams, but there has to be of reporting in from a central governance perspective, having oversight over what goes on in the organization, and mostly it's through the compliance teams, through the executive, and then into the governance committees.
Thank you, Jamie. We have one last question. I'm going to take from Lorraine. Are employees required to complete attendance schedules when working from home? The BCEA requires employers maintain records of TNA do we need to do this when employers are working from home? Is it relevant to all levels of employees?
So I'll put it like this. So from the companies that I'm consulting with, just to help them with their transition, everything that was happening at work is still happening at home. So it's normally you've got shift registers and you keep those kind of records depending on the nature of the environment that that individual works in. But if someone is an office worker and they're based on a 9 to 5 schedule, then the shift schedule is simply that. We know that they work from 9 to 5. But if they work in an organized environment where we need to roster employees and we need to know who was on shift and who was not on shift, you still do it in the same way that you would have done if you were still in the office. So a line manager, for instance, still has to know who's supposed to be logged on at what time. And if you're not logged on, then it's the line manager's duty and responsibility to find out what could be wrong with the employees. So the same principles that actually applied when we were still at work, they actually still apply even though we are working from home. Contractually, for people who work from 8 to 5 or 9 to whatever time in the afternoon, we don't keep shift schedules for them. Shift schedules are literally for a shift-based environment. But we only keep those records just so that we know who is supposed to be at work and at what time and who isn't. It also manages things such as if you're going to take a break, what time is your break, and how many people when you are on that break are still on the floor. So we still use it in that manner. But everything that was applying when we were still in the office is still applicable in the same way when we're at home. It just needs better controls in terms of how do we manage it and how do we always check in on our employees to find out what exactly are they doing.
Thank you. I think we have a second last one, Greg. I didn't hear us read this one that was asked very earlier in the session. The question is from Gizi, and he's saying, I have developed a material on papaya and an unpublished book on school of governance and have been wondering how workplace will be defined when working from home, how collective agreements and Labor Relations Act impact on the same. And maybe as a closing one, we could just each share our thoughts on that one, starting with Jamie.
Right.
Jamie? There we go.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
so
we can.
Poppy is, it's something that's quite new, and I mentioned earlier that we companies are really we've got a year till July next year to ensure compliance with the Act, and I think most companies are at this stage assessing what kinds of data we are processing, storing, sharing. What processes do we have in place to get to obtain consent, so consent management, records management, and establishing the strategic enablement, like developing your operating models, ensuring you have. So there's a myriad of actually a roadmap that we've developed to ensure that we have all of the aspects of papaya ready to ensure that we comply. How it impacts on, I'm not sure if I fully understood the question, for people that are working from home.
Yes.
Is that, yeah, so I mentioned that security and data governance protocols are going to really need to be put in place, especially so that we eliminate or reduce the risk of privacy breaches or cyber security issues. And we've seen recently, in some of the cases that are coming forth in the media, cyber risk is right up there, and it's increased exponentially, especially now that people are working remotely. There's a lot of downloading of software that may not be something that is user-friendly or works, is compatible with the systems. And it's really a human error that sometimes causes these breaches. So I think this act, will really help us, as well as the cybersecurity bill that's in the, just needs to be assented to, which really does create the regulatory platform to govern this area and will provide some guidance to employees. But for now, I think POPI does provide a good basis for data governance. I think it needs to be applied as the context of each company prescribes it.
Thank you, Jamie. Nhlanhla, would you like to add?
Yes, I think I've been looking at the past 2 years or so, and the one thing that the organizations that I'm familiar with have done quite well has been to create awareness, training, and making sure that there is a dedicated team that looks at data, ensuring that customers, employees understand what is actually data privacy, because here's the thing is you cannot achieve total compliance if you don't have the best legislation, but if training has not been done, your policies do not support this, then you've got a problem. So what I like and what I've seen that has been done quite well has been the training and awareness that has been done in the organization, and to have a dedicated team where if you're not sure as an employee, there is your data privacy officer that is able to then give you all that information. The screening, we sit in front of our computers, and imagine if you're on your screen, you are able to be reminded that if you do this means that you are non-compliant. And I think that awareness has helped a lot of employees. But again, it has been quite good for the organization, because then compliance with compliant employees ensures that a lot of the companies actually, I guess, survive data breaches. So yes, over to you, Mel.
Thank you, Nhlanhla. Mpumile, from a Labour Actor, did you have any thoughts about it, just for an interest?
So from a labor relations perspective, the piece of legislation was always enacted just to create a framework for employees and employers and how we need to engage one another, but still ensuring principles of fairness. So that exercise that we need to go into for the rest of the year and just into the going future, depending on if things will ever go back to normal. So if you consider the current circumstances and you consider working from home, we just need to find a way. How do we apply the same laws and the same principles in our own spaces? Because ultimately, I may be working in my own little confined space, but I still make up part of one big organization, and that does not change. So fortunately for us, our labor laws take that into consideration to say, despite where you may be situated and positioned in the world, ultimately you still are an employee of this particular organization, and you still need to have a framework in terms of how do we engage as the business and as employees. So I think my parting comment on that is we just need to find a way of adequately interpreting those laws based on where we work, but the laws are still very much applicable.
Excellent, thank you. We do have some more questions, but we will answer them. We've got to just close off. I do want to say there's one amazing comment coming from Yolanda to all the panelists, saying thank you very much. Quite informative and thought-provoking for the future of compliance and the ever-changing working environment. Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you to our panelists. And it would be, as I close the question and answer sessions and the mentions, it would be remiss of me as the Sales and Marketing Director of LexisNexis if I don't find one of our solutions, albeit everything we spoke about today, technology, and just ending off the session, as Nhlanhla said, something to remind you around governance and compliance and creating reports, as Jamie has mentioned. I would like our panelists, especially Nhlanhla and Jamie, just to give us a view on currently that you're using Lexis Assure and keeping abreast of regulatory changes, which is what we were talking about. How do we keep abreast with regulatory changes in the industry? So can I get I'll start with Nhlanhla that's using that product.
Thank you so much, Mel. So what has been so great about Lexis Assure is, before we went to, full technology, you'd have to rely on external, service providers to keep you abreast. But what has been so great, and I think what has actually made us be informed and to better inform our executives is the fact that every time when there's a change in legislation, we're able to get the alert, and we're able to actually change the business from being a legal language to a business language, which is more palatable to the people that we inform. And so I think for us, with the team that we work with, lucky has been quite wonderful is the fact that we're able to get the alert in real time. And if there's any, I think, contribution that we need to make as a business, we're able to do that on time. So it's been quite wonderful, and thank you.
Excellent. And in closing remarks, Jamie, how do you find the Lexis Assure product?
Thanks, Mel. So we are extremely grateful for this product because it really does alert us to understanding any or all of the regulatory updates that occur throughout, the landscape that is applicable to us. What's nice is, that you can actually choose subject areas and for the industries that are applicable to you. And there's, very wide range, not just South African law, but we also use the content for the Africa, the countries that we have we do business in, and that's really good because without it, it would be an almost impossible task to understand the regulation that's applicable. What's also nice is you get alerts through emails in real time and an analysis of the legislation. Which you can then communicate, as Nhlanhla said, in clear business language as well, to the management teams that need to hear this information, as well as to report back. What's nice is it gives you emerging pieces of laws and regulations that are that may not be foreseen. So it highlights bills and new pieces of legislation or new amendments that will be forth. It's really been effective and efficient in our organization and quite useful for us to be able to do what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Nhlanhla. Thank you, Vile. It has been an amazing morning spending my time with such intelligent women and just getting such great golden nuggets this morning just to think differently. And I'm going to say thank you and hand over to Greg to close the session for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie. I think you've done a fantastic job as a facilitator. Having an all-woman panel has really been enlightening for me. But I do have a couple of other things to make. There's Stevie Jay, Nelly and Shannon in the back end have really worked really hard to put this all together. Of course, there's a word of thanks to the Chartered Governance Institute of South Africa, who co-hosted this solution for us, this webinar for us. And also, if you look at the screen, you'll see that if you would like a free trial to the Lexis Assure, that's the email alerting system of changes and regulations, just send a mail to webinars@lexisnexis.co.za. And likewise, if you would like a copy of the recording, you could also send a mail to that email address. And finally, thank you very much to all the attendees. We really appreciate you joining. Thank you for the questions and the comments you made, and I hope this has been really enlightening for you guys as well. Thank you very much.